afternoon from Castle Goring, from Mickey and from me. Mickey and I are separating this afternoon because it is really boiling hot. It is so hot that I am tempted to speak in Jamaican patois and say it at bad. So, Mickey is safely ensconced on the chaise longue, aren't you, Mickey Moons? And I am going to be here on a fauteuil, okay? So, we have quite a lot of ground to cover this afternoon, so I will plunge right in, but with one proviso. I am saving the best for the last. Or to put it another way, what is the best where I'm concerned? Something that's really rather heartfelt. So I am saving that for the last. Okay? We have some interesting stuff, not the least of which is nobody should trust Wikipedia, says its co-founder Larry Sanger, who claims the site has been taken over by left-wing volunteers who write off sources that don't fit their agenda as fake news. I will go further and say that my own personal experience of Wikipedia has been that there are people actively on the site, volunteers in quotes, who go out of their way to denigrate and actually forward lies by distorting the truth about some of the people whose entries are on Wikipedia. I speak from personal experience. My people have on several occasions corrected certain misinformation that they have on it. We have actually, in fact, been careful enough to not remove some of the misinformation so much as correct it. And I will, for instance, refer to a supposed criticism of my Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother book. Before the book was published, the Daily Mail, who was royally peed off because they had not got serial rights to the book. The serial rights went to the Sunday Times, and therefore decided they were going to be as honourable and decent as they can often be. And so they did a spoiler. They also got two of their favourite journalists to provide quotes, notwithstanding the fact that neither journalist had ever read the book or seen any of the contents of the book. Had they seen any of the contents of the book, the Mail would have been in breach of its contract to us, which was to not disclose any of the contents of the book to anyone. So either they breached their contract, which I do not think they did, or then they simply rang up two of their favourite hacks, which is exactly what I know happened, asked for quotes, told them more or less what the quotes should be, and both these journalists rather unethically obliged. We have on many occasions left that up, but simply counterbalanced it with a quote from Lynn Barber, who is a far more eminent journalist than either of the two journalists that Wikipedia quotes could ever hope to be. And in the Sunday Times, she said, I like her, I admire her, buy her book. And she made it absolutely clear that she believed that the contents of my book were sound. Notwithstanding the fact that my people have tried to redress the balance that Wikipedia has been pushing, which is really lying about my book, and I'll come to that in a second. Every single time it's posted, it's removed, because my entry is very, very deliberately skewed against me to be as denigratory as possible. Nothing positive is put in unless they absolutely can't help it, which is ironic, because if you stop to think, considering the upbringing I had and that I'm Jamaican, you would have thought that actually there would be some feeling for the fact that I have actually achieved something and made something of my life, but not a bit of it, because they rather stupidly, these volunteers, these woke left-wing activists, have decided that they don't like me. My Wikipedia entry is filled with inaccuracies. They don't get even the number of books that I have written correct. It's a shocking disgrace that Wikipedia has degenerated to the extent that it has. And I agree with Mr. Sanger. I think anybody who, well, I've said for a long time now actually, and so I'll just cut to the chase on this one. Anybody who relies on Wikipedia is buying fool's gold. Most of the entries are either inaccurate, insufficient, or quite frankly, just plain plumb false. Very sad, because Wikipedia had the potential to be the great Library of Alexandria brought to life by the public. Very sad. Now, Doreen Lorenzo says, I just heard that Harry's wife and Elton John's husband are making an animated children's series called Pearl, about a 12-year-old girl following the lives of famous women that she admires. I wonder if Pearl is biracial. Well, we'll have to wait and see, but I wouldn't be surprised if Pearl turns out to be biracial, but very fair-skinned biracial, with a Caucasian nose that maybe started out as something else. You know what's really entertaining about this is that Meghan is so utterly self-centered and so overconfident and so completely up her own digestive system, entering it through the orifice upon which I am sitting, that she just doesn't understand that a little bit of modesty would actually be an attribute. I mean, she acted demure on the steps of St. George's Chapel when she was posing as a virginal bride. That, I suppose, is rather like Grand Central Station posing as a central station that had never had even one visitor. Really, I mean, honestly, when everybody knows that she has been married before and that she has had a very, very rich and colourful private life. But she posed as a virginal bride of 30-something. Well, this actually, I don't know about all of you, but this puts me in mind of that wonderful hymn, How Great Thou Art. except with Meghan, it's not how great thou art. And I have a terrible singing voice, so bear with me. It's as bad as Marlene Dietrich's was. It might even be worse. I've always said I have a vice and not a voice. Anyway, I think the message Meghan is giving us is, and all of you in awesome wonder should behold the splendour of the magnificent person that I am. And now you see the magnificence of me, how great I am, how great I am. That's the message. How great Meghan is. That her 12-year-old, well, I'm jumping the gun, so let me not jump the gun. Let me not jump the gun, because Susan Parker says, I read today that she and some other guy are going to produce an animated show on a 12-year-old girl named Pearl. It's about the girl's journey. My question is, how much of a journey can a 12-year-old have? And someone else also asked, was I aware of the fact that Meghan had claimed that she was basing Pearl on herself? Well, the self-fascination is quite amazing. And what is really interesting from my point of view about all of this is that when somebody is so grossly enamored of herself, and to such an extent that we are actually looking at a form of insanity in action, because it is insane to consider yourself, no matter who you are, to be of such overwhelming interest to others that you would base everything upon them. And what Meghan doesn't understand is that nobody's actually interested in her. We are interested in the car crash that she has created. So I suppose, actually, I'll correct myself. We are now interested in her. But we're not interested in her because she is intrinsically of interest. We are interested in her because it is the ghoulish nature of a human being to be fascinated as one sees insanity in action, or destructiveness in action, or anything truly bizarre, or anything truly extraordinary, or anything truly exceptional. What is also interesting is that positive exceptionalism has limits. Negative exceptionalism is often limitless until it ends in the destruction of the egotist, which is why everybody is so interested in Meghan. She's just not understood what people are interested in and why. The 12-year-old Meghan. Well, we're going to discover that Pearl, which incidentally is a version of the name Meghan. So yet again, we have the self-centeredness of how great I am, how great I am. Goodness gracious me, I'm so great. I'm just so wonderful. Let's see what she comes up with. Now, I have been told that David Furnish, who incidentally I've met and is absolutely charming. I've met him once or twice. The last time I met him was at one of Elton John's pearls and tiaras or whatever it was called ball. I forget. White tie and tiaras ball it was called. Charming man. And I know people who know him well, and I have very mixed reports about him, as one often does about people. So I keep an open mind on Elton John's husband, because he was perfectly correct and pleasant with me, but he is not a film producer, nor is Meghan, or Pearl, the Pearl. You know, she's a pearl. Oh my gosh, I'm a pearl. I'm so special. Let's see what they come up with. It's possible that they will come up with good content, because it's actually a good idea. Looking at historical women and or contemporary women who have achieved something through the eyes of a 12-year-old and the lessons that that 12-year-old can be taught. It's actually a good idea. Let's see if they can swing it. Because we're not speaking about flowers, which Elton John is very well known for. And I have to say, the white tie and tiara balls were very, very beautifully done. Everything was impeccably done and screamed money. Let's see if it actually turns out to be a success. I think we should give them an opportunity to prove us right or wrong, depending on what our attitude is. However, it's the rampant egotism, the rampant self-centeredness that gets to us, at least to me. And I know to several of the people who have sent in questions as well. At this point, I also ought to say, bear with me while I am showing my wrinkled old arms, because it's too hot to cover them up. I'm sorry, so please bear with me. Normally, I think at my age, a woman is safer with covering up rather than exposure. But when it's this hot, let me tell you, my dear, I'm throwing all sorts of considerations of that nature into the scrap heap. Mrs. McRae says, Lady C, forget the adults. Has Harry had any communication, interaction of any sort with his nephews and niece? I wonder how this rift has been explained to the little innocent ones. This rather puts me in mind of the Duke of Windsor, who, when he was the Prince of Wales, was always dropping in on the York family, and he was very close to his nieces Lilibet and Margaret Rose. And then once his relationship with Mrs. Simpson started to gain momentum, and the problems of whether he would be able to succeed in making her Queen or Duchess of Lancaster started to bite. And he became very suspicious of his sister-in-law, Elizabeth. It has to be said with some justification. He withdrew. And then, of course, after the abdication, he practically never ever saw them again, which was really rather perplexing for the girls, because Lilibet was 10 years old. Margaret was only 6, but Lilibet was 10. So that left a gap. My understanding is that the relationship has actually been birthed, B-E-R-T-H-E-D, like a yacht, not birthed like giving birth, you know, puppies giving birth, or women giving birth, surrogates giving birth. Not that sort of birth. Yacht birth. I'm being very mischievous. Sorry, bear with me. Well, fortunately, George, Charlotte and Louis have been young enough that it's not really going to make very many inroads. They have the rest of the family, and, you know, at that age, it's easy to draw a veil over ruptures. So I think it's not a problem. Becca Stephanie Thornquist says, "Good evening, Lady C and Mickey. Mickey, you got a greeting. I have 2 questions today. First of all, I just read in the newspapers that Fergie said that Diana would love Catherine and Harry's wife. What do you think of this? Also, do you know of Neville Goddard and his teachings? I know that you are from Jamaica and he was from Barbados. Have a super lovely evening, Lady C and sweet little Mickey. Lots of love." Thank you very much, my dear, for not only your question, but your kind thoughts. Neville Goddard is someone I had not heard about. I investigated him. He was an interesting man. I basically agree with some of his tenets, but I'm not going to go into them in any great detail. Just to say that his understanding of Christianity has intellectual merit, but he is not someone I'm particularly familiar with. Now, insofar as the rest of the question is concerned, I have no doubt that Diana would have liked Catherine. Diana was very jealous and possessive of her children and anybody to whom she was close. So I think she would have inevitably had jealous moments with her daughters-in-law. I think she would have initially liked Meghan, depending on if Meghan turned on the fusillade of charm the way she did with Charles and the Queen. But other members of the royal family saw through her. And Diana might well have seen through her from the word go. I do not agree with Sarah York, incidentally, that Diana would still like Meghan. Sarah, as usual, is pushing her own agenda. And although I have nothing against Sarah personally, I would take what she says in this instance with a pinch of salt, because there is no way that Diana would have approved of some of what is going on at the moment. Of course, Sarah, who has been something of a pariah in the royal family, will sympathize with anybody else who achieves pariah status. But I will make one point. I actually think that Sarah York was treated slightly harshly. She really wasn't doing anything so appalling that she deserved to be cast into the outer darkness for the decades that she was by Prince Philip. However, putting that aside, I actually see very few parallels between Sarah's conduct and, well, actually I do. Very embarrassing. Sorry, I take it back. Sarah has been a systematic embarrassment. She is very enthusiastic, exuberant, and she has hopefully modified with the decades, and she's very good-hearted. That I know from my own personal experience. She can be very good-hearted, and she's a good sport. However, she is confusing the fact that she was a bit of an adventurous and had to hustle for money because she got a really rotten divorce settlement, and she shouldn't have gotten such a bad divorce settlement, although I can well see why. They understood that they were dealing with somebody who was profligate and was all, if they'd given her 50 million, she'd have squandered it and come back for more. So I get why they actually put the screws in on her. But I also understand why it meant she then was penurious and had to hustle. That is not true where Meghan is concerned. Sarah is intrinsically greedy, but she's not greedy the way Meghan is greedy. Sarah doesn't need to be a billionaire. Sarah just needs enough money to basically lead a very privileged life. That's not Meghan's shtick. Meghan wants to be a billionairess. So Sarah, you could almost say, her greed is limited and it's almost appropriate, while Meghan's is very decidedly inappropriate. But of course, it's the sympathy that a barracuda has for a shark. So, Michael Janks says, Lady C, I have a question regarding the Counsellors of State. And seeing that it includes the top 4 members of the royal family who are over 21 years of age and in line for the crown, that would include Prince Harry. Would he still be included as a Counsellor of State? Or was he removed when he stood back from the royal family? The rules governing Counsellors of State were set down in the 1937 Regency Act. Up until then, there was no act. There were a series of acts. Now there is a system in place. The system in place is the spouse of the monarch and the next 4 adults over the age of 21 who are in the line of succession. However, Harry is technically still about qualifying on that basis as a Counsellor of State. However, if they required Counsellors of State for whatever reason, Harry, by living abroad, would automatically be excluded. You have to be present. You have to be in the country. You have to be available to sign the papers that need to be signed. A Counsellor of State is somebody who is a substitute for the monarch when the monarch is not available to execute his or her official functions. So Harry would automatically be excluded. Usually 2 Counsellors of State are nominated. Prince William would doubtless be nominated. Prince Charles would be nominated. There would be no need to have Prince Harry. And Prince Andrew is also a Counsellor of State because it goes by precedence and closeness to the throne. However, if for whatever reason a Counsellor of State is deemed to be unsuitable at the time that they are going to be roped in to fulfilling the duties of a Counsellor of State, they simply go further down the line of succession. So, for instance, in the early 40s, I think it was, you had Princess Arthur of Connaught and Princess Maud, Countess of Southesk, who were roped in to be councillors of state, although they were really pretty far down the line of succession. I just say that for all it's worth. So I don't think you need have any concerns about Harry ever functioning as a councillor of state. I don't think it's going to happen. Kitty N says, Lady C, did you hear about Jamaica demanding the UK pay them a few billions in reparations money? Where is this coming from? I've read an opinion that since the Jamaican government is failing to fill their budget coffers, they decided to make the UK the bad guy by demanding money because Jamaica used to be a British colony. What do you think about this? And what are the chances that the UK will actually entertain this idea? I think that's a brilliant question. I think it's a very complex, layered situation, and I am afraid some people are not going to like some of what I'm going to say. But I'm going to say it nevertheless, because this is my considered opinion, and people don't have to agree with me. I am open to people disagreeing with me, but I'm also the sort of person who feels that if she has an opinion and it is justifiable, she should adhere to it. So, first of all, let me say, it is arrant politicisation of the most irresponsible kind for any member of the Jamaican government to actually be espousing such stupidities. I am going to quote Olivia Grange, the Minister of Sport, Youth and Culture, who told Reuters in an interview, "We are hoping for reparatory justice in all forms that one would expect if they are to really ensure that we get justice from injustices to repair the damages that our ancestors experienced. Our African ancestors were forcibly removed from their home and suffered unparalleled atrocities in Africa to carry out forced labour to the benefit of the British Empire. Redress is well overdue." Well, may I say, first of all, I actually, in my own small and humble way, was asked to help with the election of this government, and I was delighted to do so, because I thought that they were the better option. Well, they may be the better option, but I've got news for you. Any woman who comes out with claptrap like that really doesn't understand history, doesn't understand politics, and I am deeply offended. But I think it is most regrettable that Miss or Mrs. or Ms. Grange has come up with really what is a whole load of claptrap. First of all, the primary principle of justice is that you do not penalise the innocent to nail the guilty. If I recall correctly, and I know I'm right and she's wrong, the slave trade was abolished over 2 centuries ago. And slavery was abolished nearly 2 centuries ago. How is it that she is demanding reparatory justice for the damages that her ancestors suffered. She didn't suffer them. Nobody alive today suffered them. Is she seriously expecting the British people, who incidentally have a large black population, or are black people now going to be excluded from the reparations because British blacks are going to be excluded, so only British whites are supposed to pay? What about the British Chinese? What about the British Indians? What about the British Africans who sold their own kind into slavery? Why is she claiming reparatory justice, as she calls it, from 2 centuries later? It's insanity. It is illogical. It is also unjust. It cuts to the absolute kernel of what justice and injustice are all about. Nobody should be made to suffer for the sins of their ancestors. They are not the descendants' sins. They are the ancestors' sins. Olivia Grange, you're 200 years out of date. I know it plays well in Jamaica. I know it plays well with all of this victim nonsense. But I've got news for you. You'll be far better listening to Thomas Sowell, who is a famous black American philosopher and who is just one of the many people who is sick to his black back teeth of people demanding that they be cut a break and not do what they should be doing because of something that happened to their ancestors. That's one point. Another point is, when the reparatory damages are being paid, if the British were stupid enough to pay them, and I quite frankly have to tell you, I wouldn't put it past some of these politicians with their lust for approbation and approval to entertain such an unjust notion against the people of this country, the taxpayers of this country. All the taxpayers of this country, because who's paying? It is the British public now that is paying for something. It doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense, except it plays well with the popular idea in certain circles that victimhood excuses insufficiency and somehow makes people entitled to that to which they are not entitled. That's another point. A third point is, Olivia Grange doesn't look entirely black to me. What percentage of her being is going to be getting reparations if they were going to be allocated? Let's consider that point, because most West Indians are not purely black. So they're going to have to do tests to discover what percentage of each individual qualifies for reparations because of race. I mean, this is stoking the racist fire in the most irresponsible way. And it's not even done with historical soundness. Why is Miss or Ms Grange limiting her demands to the British nation? What about the King of Benin? What about the Nigerians? What about the Ghanaians? What about all the Africans who sold black people into slavery for white people to ship across the Atlantic in that appalling, dreadful Middle Passage? What about them? No reparations coming from them? So it's not going to be decided on the fact that certain people were, because this is the only thing that would have actual legal or moral merit. If you want reparations, you have to go to who created the injury. And that entity is the entity that deserves to pay compensation. However, of course, as we've already established, they've all been dead for 200 years. So putting at least 200 years, because the slave trade was going on from 1655 under the British. And what about the Jamaicans? What about the Maroons, for instance, who were enslaved by the Spanish? Aren't the Spanish going to be asked to pay compensation for that segment of the population that was enslaved? And what about, once this principle, if it should be established that the British were liable for paying compensation to the for the descendants of the slaves of Jamaica, let's now take it a step further and yet it's another logical conclusion. What about the Slavs? The word slave comes from the word Slav. Surely the Slavs have to seek compensation from the former Russian Empire. And while we're at it, what about the ancient Roman Empire? Because they were enslaved. What about the Germans? The Germans were enslaved as well. The British, what about the million white people that were put in slavery along the Barbary coast during the North African slave trade when they used to come and kidnap white people? Who's going to pay to compensate them? Let's even go a little bit further. Are all of the Africans who were enslaved by other Africans up until 1981, and incidentally, that's only when, that's the last time slavery was illegal in Africa. But since then, it's still being practiced. So let's now hit upon this little point. Presuming that you can only go after people who have enslaved legally, are we now going to have the African people who were enslaved by Africans claiming reparations from their fellow Africans? Because they are the ones who, for nearly 200 years after, certainly 150 years after slavery was abolished in the British Empire, they continued enslaving their own kind. I think if Mrs. Grange or Miss Grange or Ms. Grange, whatever her name is, I don't know her name, I've never heard of the woman before, and I have to say I'm completely unimpressed by this, although I get that it plays well in Jamaica, and I get that the JLP, which is a centrist party, needs to beat the we's in favour of the people too drum. not only the PNP that like the people, we love the people them too. I get that. I get it. But I also would have hoped for something a little bit more considered, because I have to tell you, I am so disappointed in politicians who play the populist tune when it is not in the interest of society. What we as a society need to get back to is the principle that politicians have a responsibility to make sure that they implement plans that are, and that they actually propose plans as well, not only implement, propose plans that are positive in terms of the welfare of society generally. Opening up this can of worms is only going to cause racial problems, because white people are quite rightly going to be put out, that they are supposed to be paying for the sins of their many times great-grandparents. Black people are going to be put out, that they are supposed to be many times paying for the sins as well of their many times great-grandparents. What about the Chinese? The Chinese and Indians were brought into Jamaica as indentured labour, so they were temporary slaves. Are they going to be compensated as well? What about the Irish, who were shipped to Jamaica and enslaved under the protectorate by Oliver Cromwell? Are they going to be compensated as well? Because I must tell you, I'm jumping at the front of that queue, because that's my grandmother's family. I think it is deeply regrettable, and I'm very disappointed that any Jamaican could have come up with something like this. Having said that, I'm not surprised. I have always said Jamaicans are very positive. They're positively positive, they're positively negative, but they're always positive no matter what. It's a nation of field marshals with nobody wanting to be a foot soldier. It has its merits, it has its virtues. It also regrettably has its downside. And I'm really disappointed that any member of the JLP party, and a minister of government at that, could play such an irresponsible and historically stupid, and stupid is the word, card. I think it stinks to high heaven, and I think that Jamaica's national motto is something that maybe this Jamaican government and the opposition in Jamaica, who are far more left-wing, can both remember. Out of many, one people. Jamaica used to be at the forefront of positive race relations and improved race relations. And now we have a JLP government that's going to spin around and try to cause endless racial problems, because believe me, they are endless racial problems in store if anybody entertains this stupid, irresponsible notion. And it's completely unjustifiable. Sorry to get so upset about it, but I actually think it stinks to high heaven. I really do. And you know what concerns me about this as well? That politicians in this country are so mealy-mouthed and so terrified of doing anything. Most of them have no guts. Let's cut to the chase. Most of them have no guts and gumption, and they're just little lily-livered wimps who don't care about the welfare of society. If you care about the welfare of society, British government and Jamaican government, stop this nonsense right now. No way does Jamaica deserve compensation from the British nation for slavery. No way. It happened hundreds of years ago. It's nothing to do with Britain today. And it's nothing to do with Jamaica today. And I'll end on this note. So let me go out with a real splash and a real bang. Successive Jamaican governments, as indeed have many successive third world governments, been so corrupt and so inept, they scramble to get money coming in, and most of it ends up in their Swiss and Cayman bank accounts. I'm speaking about members of the government. Now, I'm not accusing anybody in this present government of corruption, and I'm not actually accusing them of ineptitude either. But I will say, of what has happened since Jamaica was independent, I remember my father used to say, and I put it this way, Daddy used to say, you know, Buster was the best Prime Minister we had. Buster was Sir Alexander Bustamante. He was the first Prime Minister of Jamaica. And Daddy used to say, Buster's the best Prime Minister we've ever had, because Buster only stole enough to satisfy his needs and lead a pleasant life. And then Daddy used to say, some of his successors are such thieves, they would gouge out Jesus's eyes if they could reach him on the cross, then sell them to an optician. So it's not only ineptitude, it's dishonesty. In 1973, July 1973, John Pringle, the Honourable John Pringle, who was a member of the government as well as he was the director of tourism. Then he ended up being the head of the Banana Board. Then he came over here and he lived here for the rest of his life primarily. And I remember John telling me at his house on Reeves Mews in Mayfair in July, it might have been June, but I think it was July 1973, that a certain PNP politician, to his certain knowledge, in the year and a bit that the PNP had been in power, had managed to grab a hold of $73 million US. That's where the money will be going if the British government is stupid enough to fall for this blackmail. It's patent blackmail. It is an offence to humanity. It is disgusting, and I hope we will hear no more of it, because I can tell you, if we hear more of it, you're going to be hearing more from me. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and keep the questions coming in. Bye-bye.